bullet missed Josephine Carter's head by less than an inch, splintering the wooden sign behind her that read Carter's General Store, and she did not even flinch as she continued counting the coins in her palm before looking up at the drunk cowboy with eyes cold as winter steel. "You are $3 short," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, "and you just damaged my property." The cowboy, swaying on his feet, squinted at her through bloodshot eyes. "I ain't paying full price for flour that's probably got bugs in it, woman." "Then take your business elsewhere," Josephine replied, sweeping the coins off the counter and back toward him. "And that will be another $2 for the sign you just shot." The man's face purpled with rage, but before he could respond, the sheriff arrived and hauled him away, still cursing. Josephine watched them go without expression, then turned to survey the damage. The sign would need replacing. Again, that made 3 this month. "You could try being a little nicer to folks," her assistant Mary whispered from the back room. "Maybe smile once in a while." "Smiling does not fix broken signs or fill cash registers," Josephine responded curtly. "Get the broom. There is glass everywhere." It was September of 1876 in Deadwood, South Dakota, and the town was bursting at the seams with prospectors, gamblers, and opportunists drawn by the promise of gold in the Black Hills. Josephine had arrived 6 months earlier with her life savings and a determination forged in the fires of widowhood. Her husband had died 2 years prior, leaving her with nothing but debts and a lesson she would never forget. The only person she could rely on was herself. She had built her general store from the ground up, negotiating with suppliers, hauling crates, and working 16-hour days until her hands bled. The store was profitable now, one of the most successful businesses in Deadwood, but Josephine had earned a reputation that preceded her. Difficult, demanding, cold, impossible to work with. She had heard all the whispers, seen the way people crossed the street to avoid her, noticed how men tipped their hats but never stopped to chat. She told herself she did not care. Friendship did not pay bills. Kindness did not keep wolves from the door. That evening, as Josephine was closing up shop, she heard a commotion outside. 3 men had cornered a Chinese merchant in the alley beside her store, their intentions clear in the cruel set of their mouths. Josephine grabbed the rifle she kept behind the counter and stepped outside. "Move along," she said, her voice carrying across the darkening street. The men turned, sneering. "This ain't your concern, lady." "You are on my property?" Josephine replied, raising the rifle with practiced ease. "That makes it my concern. Leave, now." The men exchanged glances, weighing their options. Josephine's reputation with a firearm was as well known as her difficult temperament. Finally, they backed off, muttering curses. The Chinese merchant, Mr. Chen, bowed deeply in gratitude. "Thank you, Miss Carter. You have a kind heart." "I have property lines," Josephine corrected, but her voice was softer. "Are you hurt?" No, thanks to you." He hesitated. "If you ever need supplies from San Francisco, I have connections, good prices." Josephine nodded briskly. "I will remember that. Good evening, Mr. Chen." She returned to her store, locked the door, and climbed the stairs to her small apartment above the shop. The rooms were sparse but clean, furnished with only the essentials. Josephine lit a lamp and sat at her desk, reviewing the day's accounts by flickering light. The numbers were good. Better than good. She should have felt satisfied. Instead, she felt hollow. She pushed the feeling away, as she always did, and prepared for bed. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more reasons to keep her walls high and her heart protected. The next morning arrived with typical Deadwood chaos. A fight broke out at the saloon across the street before breakfast. 2 mules escaped from the livery and caused a minor stampede down Main Street, and a stranger rode into town on a paint horse, his duster coat covered in trail dust, his hat pulled low over his eyes. Josephine noticed him because she noticed everything that might affect her business. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. He tied his horse outside the Silver Dollar Saloon and went inside, emerging an hour later to make his way down the street, stopping occasionally to talk with shopkeepers and residents. She returned her attention to her inventory. noting that she was running low on sugar and coffee. The supply wagon from Cheyenne was due in 3 days. If it was late again, she would need to find a new supplier. The bell above her door chimed. Josephine looked up to find the stranger standing in her doorway, hat in hand, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Afternoon," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to fill the space. "You would be Miss Josephine Carter?" "I would be," she replied coolly. "And you are?" "Name is James Cordell. Call me Cord." He stepped further into the store, his eyes taking in the neat rows of goods, the swept floors, the precisely organized shelves. "Nice establishment you've got here." "Thank you. What can I help you with, Mr. Cordell?" "Actually, I am here about a job." He moved closer to the counter, and Josephine caught the scent of sage and leather. "I heard you might be looking for someone to handle freight and security." Josephine's eyes narrowed. "Where did you hear that?" "Asked around town. Seems your last man quit about 2 weeks back. Something about you being too particular about schedules and procedures." "He was unreliable and showed up drunk," Josephine said flatly. "I do not tolerate either." "What makes you think you would be any different?" Cord's smile widened. "Well, I also asked around about you specifically. Everyone said you were difficult." Josephine stiffened, her jaw tightening. "I see. Then why are you wasting both our time?" "Because want," Cord said, his brown eyes glinting with something that might have been amusement or admiration. "I think we will get along fine." The statement was so unexpected that Josephine found herself momentarily without words. She studied him more carefully. He was probably in his early 30s, with sun-weathered skin and the kind of lean muscle that came from hard work rather than brawling. His gun sat comfortably on his hip, well-maintained but not flashy. There was a steadiness to him, a calm that reminded her of deep water. "You think we will get along fine," she repeated slowly, "based on the fact that I am difficult." "Based on the fact that you have standards," Cord corrected. "There is a difference. I have done freighting work from Montana to Texas. I am good with horses, good with numbers, and I show up when I say I will. I do not drink to excess, I do not gamble away my wages, and I do not make promises I cannot keep. From what I heard, that is what you need. Someone reliable." Josephine considered him. She had been managing the freight herself for the past 2 weeks, rising at dawn to meet the supply wagons, checking every crate and barrel personally. It was exhausting work on top of running the store, and she had felt the strain in her bones. "What are you running from?" she asked bluntly. Cord did not blink. "Nothing illegal, if that is what you're asking. I am just looking for a place to settle for a while. Deadwood seems as good as any." "The pay is $30 a month plus room and board. There is a small cabin out back that needs repairs, but it is weatherproof. You work 6 days a week, Sunday off. You will handle all freight deliveries, security for the store after hours, and any heavy lifting I need done. You'll be on time, sober, and thorough. If you damage goods through carelessness, it comes out of your pay. If you steal from me, I will shoot you myself. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear, Miss Carter." Cord extended his hand. "When do I start?" Josephine looked at his hand for a long moment before shaking it. His grip was firm but not crushing, his palm calloused from years of hard work. "Tomorrow morning, 5 o'clock. Do not be late." "Would not dream of it," Cord said, settling his hat back on his head. "Thank you for the opportunity, Miss Carter." "Thank you is premature," Josephine replied. "Prove yourself first." But as Cord left the store, Josephine found herself feeling something she had not experienced in a long time. Not quite hope, not quite curiosity, but something close to both. Cord arrived the next morning at 4:45, which Josephine noted with approval as she opened the store. He had already checked the locks on the back entrance, secured the cabin, and was examining the freight schedule when she handed him a cup of coffee. "The wagon from Cheyenne comes in around noon," she said. "There will be 20 crates of dry goods, 10 barrels of flour, 5 of sugar, and various sundries. Everything needs to be checked against the manifest before unloading. I will not pay for goods I did not order or goods that arrive damaged." "Understood." Cord sipped the coffee, his eyes scanning the detailed list she had prepared. This is thorough. Mistakes cost money. So does replacing inventory that walks off when no one is watching, Cord observed, nodding toward the open back door. You might want to consider a better lock on that entrance. This one could be picked by a child. Josephine frowned. It has been adequate so far? Adequate and secure are not the same thing. Cord finished his coffee and handed the cup back. I can install something better, won't cost much, and it will give you peace of mind. It was practical advice, delivered without condescension. Josephine found herself nodding. Fine, but do it on your own time. Yes, ma'am. The morning passed smoothly. Cord had an easy way with the customers who came in, friendly without being over-familiar, efficient without being cold. Josephine watched him help an elderly woman carry her purchases to her wagon, refusing the tip she offered. He broke up a potential argument between two miners over who was in line first with a joke that had both men laughing. And when a young boy tried to pocket a piece of candy when he thought no one was looking, Cord simply knelt down to the child's level and suggested he might ask his mother first. You are good with people, Josephine observed when the store emptied briefly. Cord shrugged. People are not so complicated, most just want to feel respected. And when respect does not work? Then you set boundaries, Cord replied, meeting her eyes steadily, clear and firm, same as you do. The freight wagon arrived at noon exactly. Josephine and Cord spent the next 2 hours unloading and checking every item against the manifest. Cord was meticulous, catching a discrepancy in the flour barrels that Josephine had missed. They were short 1 barrel. According to this, we should have 10 barrels of flour, Cord said, showing her the manifest. I count 9. Josephine's lips thinned. That is the 3rd time this supplier has shorted us. She turned to the wagon driver. Where is the 10th barrel? The driver, a grizzled man named Pike, scowled. That is what I loaded, lady. Not my fault if you cannot count. I can count just fine, Josephine said coldly. And unless the 10th barrel materialized legs and walked off, you are either incompetent or a thief. Pike's hand moved toward his belt. Cord stepped smoothly between them, his posture relaxed but his eyes hard. No need for this to get ugly, Cord said quietly. Oh, sis, why do not you check your wagon again, Pike? Maybe it rolled under something. I do not need to check nothing, Pike snarled. She signed for 10 barrels, that is 10 barrels delivered. I have not signed anything yet, Josephine interjected, and I will not sign for goods I did not receive. Either produce the 10th barrel or adjust the manifest and the payment accordingly. The standoff lasted another tense minute before Pike finally climbed back onto his wagon and made a great show of searching through the remaining cargo. He found nothing, because there was nothing to find. Josephine suspected he had sold the extra barrel elsewhere and hoped she would not notice. I guess one must have got left behind in Cheyenne, Pike finally grumbled. I guess so, Josephine replied icily. She took the manifest, crossed out the 10th barrel, recalculated the total, and counted out the adjusted payment. I will be finding a new supplier. Good day, Mr. Pike. Pike snatched the money and left, cursing under his breath. When he was gone, Cord let out a low whistle. You just made an enemy. I make several a week, Josephine replied, marking the shortage in her ledger. It comes with refusing to be cheated. It also comes with being right, Cord said. That took guts. Josephine glanced at him, surprised by the admiration in his voice. It took arithmetic. It took both. Cord began hauling the barrels into the storeroom. Most people would have let it go rather than cause trouble. Most people are not trying to run a business in a town where being weak gets you destroyed, Josephine said quietly. Cord paused, a barrel balanced on his shoulder. Is that what happened before? Someone tried to destroy you? Josephine's face shuddered. That is none of your concern. Just do your job, Mr. Cordell. Yes, ma'am, Cord said, but his eyes held understanding rather than offense. They worked in silence for the rest of the afternoon, falling into an easy rhythm. Cord was strong and tireless, but he was also careful, handling the goods with respect and organizing the storeroom with an efficiency that impressed Josephine despite herself. By the time the sun began to set, everything was properly stored and cataloged. "You did good work today," Josephine said as Cord prepared to leave. "Thank you." Cord settled his hat. "I will see you tomorrow morning, Miss Carter." "Josephine," she found herself saying, "if we are going to work together, you can call me Josephine." Cord's face broke into a genuine smile, the first she had seen from him. It transformed his features, warming the brown of his eyes and crinkling the corners in a way that suggested he smiled often when given the chance. "Cord," he replied, "and I will see you tomorrow morning, Josephine." After he left, Josephine stood alone in her store, listening to the sounds of Deadwood's evening revelry beginning outside. She told herself the warm feeling in her chest was simply satisfaction at having hired competent help. Nothing more. But that night, for the first time in months, she did not feel quite so hollow. The following weeks fell into a comfortable pattern. Cord arrived before dawn, helped open the store, managed the freight, and handled the security with quiet competence. He repaired the cabin without complaint, fixing the roof and shoring up the walls until it was actually livable rather than merely adequate. He installed better locks as promised. He settled disputes, deterred thieves, and gradually became a fixture of Carter's general store. More surprisingly, he became a fixture in Josephine's carefully ordered life. It started with small things. Cord began arriving with fresh coffee already brewed, claiming he made too much for just himself. Josephine started saving him the good cuts of bread from the bakery delivery, saying it would go stale otherwise. They began taking their lunch break together, sitting on the front porch of the store and watching Deadwood go about its chaotic business. "You never did say where you came from," Josephine remarked one afternoon, 3 weeks into his employment. Cord was whittling a piece of wood, his hands moving with practiced ease. "Montana, originally. Worked cattle ranches up there for about 10 years. Did some time in the cavalry before that." "Why did you leave?" He was quiet for a long moment. "My wife died. Fever took her quick. After that, I could not stay. Everything reminded me of her." Josephine's breath caught. "I am sorry. That must have been terrible." "It was," Cord said simply, "but it has been 4 years now. The grief does not cut quite so sharp anymore." He glanced at her. "You were married too, I heard." "Yes, 2 years." Josephine's voice was carefully neutral. "He died and left me with nothing but debts and a hard education about trusting people." "That why you are so careful now, so tough?" "That is why I am smart now," Josephine corrected. "There is a difference between being tough and being prepared. I learned that if I do not protect myself, no one else will." Cord nodded slowly. "That is true enough. But there is a difference between protecting yourself and closing yourself off entirely." Josephine bristled. "I am not closed off." "You do not have a single friend in this town, Josephine. People respect you, sure, but they are also scared of you. When is the last time someone invited you to dinner? Or stopped by just to chat?" "I do not need friends," Josephine said stiffly. "I need a successful business." "And once you have that, what then?" Josephine had no answer. The question disturbed her more than she wanted to admit, so she changed the subject. "What are you carving?" Cord held up the piece of wood. It was beginning to take the shape of a small bird, wings spread in flight. "Just something to keep my hands busy. I can never sit still for long." "It is beautiful," Josephine said, meaning it. "It will be when it is finished," Cord replied. "Right now, it is just potential." He said it lightly, but Josephine heard the deeper meaning. She was not ready to examine it too closely. October arrived with crisp mornings and the smell of wood smoke. Deadwood was preparing for winter, and Josephine's store did a brisk business in blankets, warm clothes, and provisions. Cord worked tirelessly, often putting in 12-hour days without complaint. Josephine found herself watching him more often than was strictly necessary, noticing the way he laughed with the children who came into the store, the gentle manner he had with the horses, the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him. She was also noticing other things, the way his shirt stretched across his shoulders when he lifted something heavy, the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her, the way her heart beat a little faster when he smiled. It terrified her. One evening, after the store had closed, Josephine was working late on the books when she heard a crash from the back room. She grabbed her pistol and moved quietly toward the sound, her heart pounding. But before she could reach the door, it burst open and Cord stumbled through, supporting a bloodied man. "Get the medical kit," Cord said urgently. "He has been shot." Josephine did not ask questions. She ran for the supplies while Cord laid the man on the cleared counter. He was young, probably no more than 20, with a bullet wound in his shoulder and a face twisted in pain. "What happened?" Josephine demanded as she began cleaning the wound. "Found him in the alley out back," Cord replied. "Looks like a robbery gone wrong. The bullet went clean through, which is good, but he has lost blood." Together they worked to stabilize the young man. Josephine had learned basic field medicine from necessity, running a store in a lawless town, and Cord's cavalry experience proved invaluable. They cleaned and bandaged the wound, got the young man to drink some water mixed with laudanum for the pain, and wrapped him in blankets. "Should we get the sheriff?" Josephine asked. "Already sent word," Cord said, "but this kid is terrified, keeps saying something about a gambling debt and men who will kill him if they find him." Josephine's jaw tightened. "He cannot stay here. If those men come looking, they will tear my store apart." "I know." Cord met her eyes. "I will take him to my cabin, hide him there until the sheriff sorts this out, but I need to know I can count on you to keep quiet about where he is." Josephine hesitated. Everything in her screamed that this was dangerous, that getting involved could bring exactly the kind of trouble she had spent months avoiding. But when she looked at the unconscious young man, barely more than a boy, and then at Cord's steady, trusting gaze, she found herself nodding. "I will keep quiet," she said. "But you need to be careful, Cord. If these men are as dangerous as he says, they will not stop looking." "I know," Cord said softly, "but I cannot just leave him to die. That is not who I am." "I know," Josephine whispered, and realized it was true. She did know who Cord was. He was steady and kind and brave in a way that had nothing to do with guns or fighting. He was the kind of man who carved wooden birds and smiled at children and took in wounded strangers without hesitation. He was, she realized with a jolt that felt like lightning, exactly the kind of man she could fall in love with. The thought was so shocking that Josephine physically stepped back. Cord noticed concern crossing his face. "You all right?" "Fine," Josephine said quickly. "Just tired. Let me help you get him to the cabin." They moved the young man under cover of darkness. The cabin was warm and secure, and Cord settled him on the bed with professional efficiency. Josephine lingered in the doorway, suddenly reluctant to leave. "Thank you," Cord said quietly, "and for trusting me with this." "Thank you for being someone I can trust," Josephine replied, and before she could second-guess herself, she reached out and touched his arm briefly. "Be safe, Cord." His hand covered hers, warm and solid. Always. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Josephine was not quite ready to name. Then she pulled away and hurried back to the store, her heart racing. She did not sleep that night, listening to every sound, jumping at every creak. But no angry gamblers came, no violence erupted. The night passed peacefully, and when dawn arrived, Josephine felt exhausted but also strangely exhilarated. Cord appeared at the usual time, looking tired, but unharmed. "He made it through the night," he reported. "Fever is down. Sheriff came by early this morning. Turns out the kid is the son of a rancher from Wyoming. Got in over his head with some card sharks. The sheriff is handling it." "Is he going to be all right?" "Should be. His father's on his way." Cord paused. "Thank you for last night, Josephine. Not many people would have helped." "You would have done it with or without my help," Josephine replied. "Maybe. But it meant something that you did?" Cord's eyes held hers. "You are not as closed off as you think, you know." Josephine felt heat rise in her cheeks, an unfamiliar sensation. "I should open the store." But as she turned away, Cord caught her hand gently. "Josephine, wait." She froze, acutely aware of his touch, the warmth of his palm against hers. "What? Would you like to have dinner with me tonight? Not here at the store, somewhere else, just the two of us?" Josephine's first instinct was to refuse, to make an excuse, to keep the walls firmly in place. But when she looked into Cord's honest, hopeful face, something in her chest cracked open. "Yes," she heard herself say, "I would like that." Cord's smile was brilliant. 6 o'clock? There's a decent restaurant at the edge of town, quiet. Good food." 6 o'clock, Josephine agreed, and spent the rest of the day in a state of nervous anticipation she had not felt since she was a girl. That evening, Josephine found herself standing in front of her small mirror trying to decide what to wear. She owned exactly 3 dresses that were not work clothes. She chose the blue one, simple but well made, and took extra care with her hair, pinning it up in a softer style than her usual severe bun. When she came downstairs at 6, Cord was waiting by his horse, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt. His eyes widened when he saw her. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Josephine felt her cheeks warm. "Thank you. You clean up well yourself." The restaurant was small and unpretentious, run by a German immigrant who served hearty food at reasonable prices. Cord had reserved a table by the window, away from the noise of the main room. As they settled in, Josephine felt the strangeness of the situation. She could not remember the last time she had eaten a meal she had not prepared herself or bolted down between customers. "This is nice," she said, and meant it. "It is," Cord agreed, "though I have to admit I was half convinced you would change your mind." "I almost did," Josephine admitted. "About 6 times." Cord laughed, the sound rich and warm. "What stopped you?" Josephine considered the question seriously. "I am not entirely sure. Maybe I'm tired of being alone. Or maybe I'm just curious." "Curious about what?" "About what happens if I let my walls down, just a little." She met his eyes. "That terrifies me, Cord. The last time I trusted someone, I lost everything." Cord reached across the table and took her hand, his grip steady and reassuring. "I cannot promise I will never hurt you, Josephine. No one can promise that, but I can promise I will never lie to you, never cheat you, and never make you feel small. You deserve better than what you got before." Tears pricked at Josephine's eyes, shocking her. She blinked them back fiercely. "I do not cry." "That is all right," Cord said gently. "You do not have to." But she did anyway, quietly, as Cord held her hand across the table and did not flinch from her tears. And somehow, impossibly, it felt like relief. They talked for hours. Cord told her about growing up in Montana, about learning to ride before he could walk, about the cavalry and the things he had seen during the Indian campaigns that still haunted him sometimes. Josephine told him about her childhood in Ohio, about her father who had been a teacher, about her late husband who had seemed charming at first but gradually revealed himself to be a gambler and a drunk. "He died owing money to half of Chicago," Josephine said. "I sold everything I owned to pay his debts. I swore I would never depend on anyone again, never let anyone have that kind of power over me." "That is not depending," Cord said quietly. "That is surviving. There is a difference." "Is there?" Josephine asked, "because from where I am standing, they feel the same." "Depending on someone means trusting them to show up, to be honest, to treat you with respect," Cord replied. "It does not mean letting them control you or take advantage. That is not partnership. That is just abuse dressed up in fancy words." Josephine absorbed this, turning it over in her mind. "You make it sound simple." "The concept is simple. The doing is hard." Cord smiled crookedly. "I should know. After my wife died, I spent 2 years angry at the whole world, pushed everyone away, told myself I was better off alone. It took hitting rock bottom to realize I was just scared." "Scared of what?" "Of caring again. Of losing again." Cord's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "But being scared is not the same as being smart. I was just protecting myself from the possibility of pain by guaranteeing my loneliness. That is not living. That is just existing." His words hit Josephine like a physical blow because they were so precisely, painfully true. She had been existing, not living. Building her business, keeping her head down, telling herself success was enough. But it was not enough. It had never been enough. "I do not know how to do this," she whispered. "I have forgotten how to be open, how to trust." "Then learn again," Cord said simply. "With me. We will go slow. No pressure, no expectations, just see where it goes." Josephine took a shaky breath and nodded. "Okay, we can try." Cord's smile could have lit the whole restaurant. "That is all I'm asking." They walked back through Deadwood slowly, in no hurry to end the evening. The town was alive with music and laughter spilling from the saloons. But it felt distant, like it belonged to a different world. Cord kept his hand lightly at the small of Josephine's back, protective without being possessive, and she found herself leaning into the touch. At the door to her store, they paused. Josephine felt suddenly nervous, like a girl on her first outing rather than a 28-year-old widow who ran her own business. "Thank you for tonight," she said. "I enjoyed it." "So did I." Cord hesitated, then leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Good night, Josephine." "Good night, Cord." She watched him walk back to his cabin, then climbed the stairs to her apartment. She got ready for bed mechanically, her mind replaying every moment of the evening. When she finally lay down, she stared at the ceiling for a long time, feeling the old familiar panic trying to claw its way up her throat. What was she doing? This was dangerous. This was stupid. This was everything she had sworn to avoid. But beneath the panic was something else, something warm and fragile and hopeful, something that felt like the beginning of happiness. Josephine closed her eyes and for the first time in 2 years let herself imagine a future that included someone else. Over the next month, Josephine and Cord's relationship deepened slowly, carefully, like ice melting in spring. They continued their lunch breaks together, but the conversation grew more personal, more intimate. Cord told her about his dreams of eventually owning a ranch, somewhere quiet where he could raise horses. Josephine confessed her secret love of poetry, a remnant from her father's influence that she had buried along with so many other soft parts of herself. "Read me something," Cord said one afternoon. Josephine hesitated, then went upstairs and returned with a slim, worn volume. She read him Elizabeth Barrett Browning, her voice initially self-conscious but growing stronger as she lost herself in the familiar words. When she finished, Cord was looking at her with an expression that made her heart skip. "You have a beautiful voice," he said. "You should read more often." "To who?" Josephine asked with a self-deprecating laugh. "The flour barrels?" "To me," Cord replied. "Anytime you want." He started bringing her small gifts, nothing expensive or ostentatious, just thoughtful things. A hair ribbon in a color that matched her eyes. A bar of fancy soap from San Francisco. Fresh wildflowers when he rode out to meet a supply wagon. And one day, the carved wooden bird, finally finished and polished to a soft gleam. "I want you to have it," Cord said, pressing it into her hands. "It reminded me of you." Josephine turned the delicate carving over, marveling at the detail. "Because I am flighty?" "Because you are free," Cord corrected gently, "or you could be if you let yourself." Josephine kept the bird on her desk where she could see it while she worked. The first snow came in early November, dusting Deadwood in white and bringing with it a bone-deep cold. Business slowed as people hunkered down, venturing out only for necessities. Josephine and Cord spent more time alone in the store, the intimacy of shared space and shared work drawing them closer. One particularly bitter afternoon, with the wind howling outside and no customers in sight, Cord built up the fire in the small stove and made hot coffee. They sat together in the back room, wrapped in blankets, listening to the storm. "Do you ever think about leaving Deadwood?" Cord asked. "Sometimes," Josephine admitted. "When the snow gets bad or when another drunk shoots up my store, but I have worked so hard to build this, I am not ready to walk away." What if you did not have to walk away? What if you could sell, take the profit, and start something new somewhere else, somewhere less wild? Josephine looked at him carefully. Is that what you want? To leave? I want whatever makes you happy, Cord said quietly. If that is staying here, I am staying. If that is going somewhere else, I will go. I am not going anywhere without you, Josephine. Not unless you tell me to. The declaration hung in the cold air between them. Josephine felt her throat tighten with emotion she did not quite know how to name. When did this become so serious? She whispered. For me? Cord reached out and cupped her face gently. About 3 days after I started working here. When you dressed down that freight driver for trying to cheat you and did not even blink when he threatened you, I thought, now there is a woman who knows her worth. I have been falling ever since. Cord, Josephine breathed, but whatever she was going to say was lost as he leaned in and kissed her. It was gentle at first, almost tentative, as if he was afraid she might pull away. But Josephine did not pull away. Instead, she leaned into him, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders as the kiss deepened. It felt like coming home after a long, cold journey. It felt like safety and passion and possibility all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cord rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said simply. I did not plan to. I was not looking for it, but there it is. I love you, Josephine Carter, difficult reputation and all. Josephine laughed, the sound breaking on something that might have been a sob. I love you too. God help me, but I do. I tried not to. I tried so hard to keep my walls up, but you just kept being steady and kind and exactly what I needed without even realizing I needed it. So what do we do now? Cord asked. Josephine pulled back enough to look at him properly. His eyes were warm and patient, waiting for her answer without pressure. She thought about her carefully built life, her rigid control, her determination never to be vulnerable again, and then she thought about the alternative. Years of loneliness, of existing without living, of safety without joy. We keep going, she said firmly, together, whatever that looks like. Cord's smile was blinding. He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring, and Josephine let herself fall into it, into him, into the terrifying and wonderful possibility of love. That night, after the store closed, Cord walked Josephine upstairs to her apartment. At the door, she hesitated, then took his hand. Stay, she said quietly, just for tonight. I do not want to be alone. Are you sure? Josephine nodded. I am sure. They went inside together, and for the first time in 2 years, Josephine did not feel hollow. She felt full of hope and love and the fragile, precious knowledge that she did not have to do everything alone anymore. They made love slowly, tenderly, learning each other's bodies with hands and mouths and whispered words. Cord was patient and attentive, making sure Josephine felt safe and cherished every moment. And when they finally lay together afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Josephine felt something she had thought lost forever. Peace. I was so scared, she whispered into the darkness. Of this. Of feeling this much. I know, Cord murmured, his lips against her hair. But you are the bravest person I know, Josephine. You built a life from nothing. You survived loss and betrayal and came out stronger. This is just another kind of bravery. What kind? The kind that chooses love even when it is risky. The kind that stays open even when it would be easier to close off. Cord tightened his arms around her. I will spend every day proving I am worthy of that bravery. I promise you that. Josephine believed him. For the first time in years, she let herself believe in promises. The winter deepened, but Josephine barely noticed the cold. She was too wrapped up in the warmth of new love, in the daily joy of working alongside Cord, of sharing meals and conversation and quiet moments by the fire. They were discreet, knowing that Deadwood's gossip mill could be vicious, but those who paid attention noticed the change in Josephine. She smiled more, laughed occasionally, was fractionally less sharp with difficult customers. Mary, her assistant, pulled her aside one day with a knowing grin. "You and Cord," she said, "it is about time." Josephine felt her cheeks heat. "I do not know what you mean." "Oh, please. Everyone has seen the way he looks at you, like you hung the moon, and you look at him the same way, though you try to hide it." Mary squeezed her arm. "I am happy for you, Josephine. You deserve this." "Thank you," Josephine said softly, surprised by how much the words meant. As Christmas approached, Deadwood transformed. Even the roughest miners and gamblers seemed touched by the spirit of the season. Josephine decorated the store with pine branches and ribbon, and Cord installed a small tree in the corner, which he insisted was good for business. "People like to see something cheerful," he said, hanging handmade ornaments. "Reminds them of home." On Christmas Eve, the store closed early. Josephine and Cord prepared a simple but festive meal in her apartment. Roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread from the bakery. They ate by candlelight, talking and laughing, occasionally feeding each other bites of food with the casual intimacy of people deeply comfortable together. "I have something for you," Cord said when they had finished eating. He produced a small wrapped package. Josephine opened it carefully, her breath catching when she saw what was inside. It was a locket, simple gold, with a delicate engraving of a bird in flight on the front. Inside was a tiny photograph of Cord. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "Cord, you should not have spent so much." "I wanted to," Cord replied. "I wanted you to have something you could keep close, something to remind you that you are not alone anymore." Josephine's eyes filled with tears. She stood and kissed him fiercely. "Thank you. Help me put it on?" Cord fastened the locket around her neck, his fingers warm against her skin. Josephine touched it reverently. "I have something for you too," she said, and went to retrieve her own carefully wrapped package. Cord opened it to find a beautiful leather-bound journal and a fine fountain pen. "Josephine, this is too much." "No, it is not. You are always talking about your dreams, about the ranch you want to build someday. I thought you could use this to plan it out, to make it real." Josephine smiled. "Dreams have more power when you write them down." Cord looked at her for a long moment, his eyes suspiciously bright. Then he set the journal carefully aside and pulled her into his arms. "Marry me," he said against her hair. Josephine froze. "What?" Cord pulled back enough to meet her eyes. "Marry me, Josephine. I know it is fast. I know you are probably scared, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I want to build a life with you, whatever that looks like. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to turn your dreams into our dreams. So marry me, please." Josephine felt panic and joy warring in her chest. "Cord, I do not know. What if it does not work? What if we make a mistake?" "What if we do not?" Cord countered gently. "What if we are exactly what each other needs? What if this is the beginning of something wonderful?" He took her hands. "I am not asking you to stop being careful or strong or independent. I am just asking you to let me stand beside you while you are all those things. Let me be your partner, Josephine, in business, in life, in everything." Josephine looked into his honest, hopeful face and felt the last of her walls crumble. She thought about the life she had built alone, the safety she had created through sheer force of will. It was a good life, a successful life, but it was not a happy life. Not like this, not like what she could have with Cord. "Yes," she whispered, "yes, I will marry you." Cord's whoop of joy echoed through the small apartment. He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, and Josephine kissed him back with all the love and hope and terrified courage in her heart. They were married in January in a simple ceremony at the small church on the edge of Deadwood. Mary stood as witness, along with the sheriff and Mr. Chen and a handful of other people Josephine had gradually, tentatively begun to think of as friends. She wore her best dress and carried wildflowers that Cord had somehow managed to find despite the snow. Cord wore a new suit and smiled so widely his face must have hurt. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Cord kissed her like it was the most important thing he had ever done. And Josephine, who had spent 2 years believing she would never trust anyone again, kissed him back with all the love in her newly opened heart. The winter passed in a blur of happiness. Josephine and Cord moved into the apartment above the store together, combining their lives with surprising ease. They worked side by side during the day and retired to their private world at night, learning each other's rhythms and habits and preferences. Cord proved to be neat and organized, which Josephine appreciated. Josephine proved to be surprisingly playful in private, which delighted Cord. They also began planning for the future. Using Cord's journal, they mapped out their dream: a ranch somewhere outside Deadwood, far enough for privacy but close enough to maintain the store. They would breed horses, Cord's passion, and Josephine would continue running the store with hired help. It would take years to save enough money, but they had time. They had each other. Spring arrived with mud and chaos as the prospectors returned in force. Business boomed, and Josephine hired additional help to manage the increased demand. She found herself delegating more, trusting others in a way she never had before. It felt strange but also liberating. "You are getting soft," Cord teased one evening as they reviewed the books together. "I am getting smart," Josephine corrected. "I cannot do everything myself. Not if we want to eventually move to a ranch." "I love when you say we," Cord murmured, kissing her temple. "I never get tired of hearing it." Josephine smiled and leaned into him. "We," she repeated deliberately. "We are going to build something wonderful together." "Yes, we are," Cord agreed. In April, Josephine realized she was pregnant. The discovery left her reeling with a complicated mix of emotions: joy, terror, hope, and fear all tangled together. She told Cord that evening, watching his face carefully for his reaction. His eyes went wide, then filled with tears. "A baby? We are having a baby?" "Yes," Josephine said, her own voice shaking. "Cord, I am scared. What if something goes wrong? What if I cannot do this?" Cord pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "You can do anything, Josephine. You are the strongest person I know, and you will not be doing it alone. I will be right here every step of the way. Promise?" "I promise. Always." Over the following months, Josephine's body changed and grew. She felt ungainly and uncomfortable, but Cord never failed to tell her she was beautiful. He took on more of the physical work at the store, insisting she rest whenever possible. He brought her tea when she was nauseated in the mornings and rubbed her swollen feet in the evenings. He read to her from his journal, sharing his plans for the ranch and asking for her input on every detail. "What do you think about naming it Hope Ranch?" he asked one night. "Because that is what we are building here. Hope for the future." Josephine, huge and uncomfortable in her 7th month, smiled through her discomfort. "I think that is perfect." The baby came in November, during an early snowstorm. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Josephine was convinced she could not continue. But Cord was there, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, refusing to let her give up. And finally, after 18 hours, a thin wail filled the room. "A boy," the midwife announced, placing the tiny, squalling infant on Josephine's chest. "A healthy baby boy." Josephine looked down at her son, at his red face and waving fists, and felt love slam into her with the force of a physical blow. "Hello," she whispered. "Hello, little one." Cord was crying openly, his hand gentle on the baby's small head. "He is perfect. You are perfect. God, Josephine, you are amazing." They named him Thomas, after Josephine's father, Thomas Cordell, Born in Deadwood during a snowstorm, with a cry like a mountain lion and his father's brown eyes, Josephine had never felt so exhausted or so happy in her entire life. The first months of Thomas's life were a blur of sleepless nights and constant worry. Josephine, who had faced down armed men without flinching, found herself terrified by the fragility of her tiny son. But Cord was patient and steady, taking the night feedings when he could, changing diapers without complaint, walking Thomas for hours when he was fussy. "You are a natural," Josephine said one evening, watching Cord rock their son to sleep. "So are you," Cord replied. "You just worry more." "Someone has to worry." "Then worry. I will be calm enough for both of us." Cord smiled at her over Thomas's small head. "We are a good team, Josephine." She knew he was right. They were a good team, better than she had ever imagined possible. By the time Thomas was 6 months old, Josephine had adjusted to motherhood enough to return to managing the store part-time. They hired a young woman to help with both Thomas and the business, and gradually found a rhythm that worked for their growing family. Josephine discovered she could balance her fierce independence with the vulnerability of motherhood, that being a parent did not mean losing herself. The years passed quickly. Thomas grew into a sturdy, curious toddler with his father's easy temperament and his mother's sharp mind. Josephine and Cord continued saving for their ranch, slowly but steadily accumulating the funds they would need. The store prospered, and Josephine's reputation gradually shifted from difficult to tough but fair. When Thomas was 3, they bought the land for Hope Ranch, 200 acres of rolling grassland about 5 miles outside Deadwood. It was beautiful country with good water and plenty of space for the horses Cord planned to raise. They spent weekends out there, camping and planning, teaching Thomas to ride on a gentle mare named Daisy. "This is really happening," Josephine said one afternoon, standing on a small rise and surveying their land. "We are really doing this." "Did you ever doubt it?" Cord asked, his arm around her waist. "Every day," Josephine admitted. "But I did it anyway. We did it anyway." "That is what makes it real," Cord said. "Not the absence of doubt, but the choice to keep going despite it." They broke ground on the ranch house that spring. It would be a simple structure at first, just 4 rooms and a porch, but it would be theirs, built with their own hands and their shared dreams. Cord did most of the construction work with help from friends and hired hands, while Josephine managed the finances and the design. Thomas played in the dirt nearby, building his own imaginary ranch with sticks and rocks. The house was completed by fall, just in time for winter. The day they moved in, Josephine stood in the empty main room and felt tears streaming down her face. "Why are you crying?" Cord asked, concerned. "Because I am happy," Josephine said. "Because 5 years ago I was alone and convinced I would always be alone, and now I have this, a husband who loves me, a beautiful son, a home we built together. It feels like a miracle." Cord pulled her close, his own eyes damp. "You are my miracle, Josephine, every single day." Life at Hope Ranch settled into a comfortable pattern. Cord worked with the horses, building a small but respected breeding program. Josephine continued managing the store in Deadwood, making the trip into town 3 days a week. Thomas thrived in the open spaces, growing strong and confident. And every evening the 3 of them gathered for dinner, talking and laughing and simply being together. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Josephine gave Cord a gift, a painted sign for the ranch entrance, beautifully lettered with the words Hope Ranch, Cordell family. "It is perfect," Cord said, his voice thick with emotion. "Just like you." "I am not perfect," Josephine corrected. "I am still difficult sometimes." "You are exactly the right amount of difficult," Cord replied, kissing her. "You challenge me. You make me better. You make every day an adventure." "Even the boring days when nothing happens but chores?" "Especially those days." Cord pulled her into his arms. "Because I get to do those boring chores with you. That is the whole point, Josephine. It is not about grand gestures or constant excitement. It is about choosing each other every day through everything. Josephine kissed him deeply. I choose you, always. And I choose you, forever. When Thomas was 5, Josephine discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news brought pure joy rather than fear. She knew what to expect now, knew she could handle whatever came. Cord was thrilled, already making plans to expand the house. Maybe a girl this time, he said hopefully. Or another boy, Josephine replied. Either way, we will love them. Of course we will. How could we not? The pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Josephine was more relaxed, or perhaps because she trusted her body more. She worked almost until the end, only stopping when she got too uncomfortable to ride into town. And on a warm June evening with Thomas sleeping in the next room and Cord holding her hand, she delivered a healthy baby girl. They named her Margaret, after Cord's mother. Margaret Cordell, born at Hope Ranch with the windows open and the smell of prairie grass drifting through. She had Josephine's green eyes and a remarkable set of lungs that she used frequently and enthusiastically. Thomas was enchanted with his baby sister, constantly wanting to hold her and help care for her. Cord was besotted, carrying Margaret everywhere and singing her silly songs that made Josephine laugh. And Josephine, watching her family with a full heart, felt the last traces of fear and bitterness finally dissolve. She had been so convinced that opening her heart meant risking destruction. But what she had learned was that love, real love, did not destroy. It built, it strengthened, it transformed. The years continued to pass, marked by small triumphs and everyday joys. Thomas started school in Deadwood, riding into town with Josephine on her store days. Margaret grew into a fierce, adventurous toddler who refused to be left behind on anything her brother did. The ranch prospered, with Cord's horses gaining a reputation for quality throughout the territory, and Josephine finally sold the store, passing it on to Mary and her new husband, feeling ready to focus entirely on the ranch and her family. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Cord took Josephine riding out to a secluded spot on their land, a small meadow filled with wildflowers. They left the children with a neighbor and spent the afternoon talking and remembering. Do you ever miss it? Cord asked. The store, being in town. The independence of running your own business. Josephine considered the question seriously. Sometimes I miss the challenge of it, the satisfaction of a good negotiation or a profitable quarter, but I do not miss being alone. I do not miss the person I had to be to survive in that world. You were always strong. I was always hard, Josephine corrected. There is a difference. You taught me that. You showed me I could be strong without being closed off, that I could be careful without being cold. You taught me things too, Cord said quietly. You taught me it was possible to love again after loss, that opening my heart was worth the risk. You saved me, Josephine, as surely as I like to think I saved you. We saved each other, Josephine said firmly. That is what partners do. Cord leaned over and kissed her, deep and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. I have something for you. Inside was a ring, a simple band of gold with a small diamond. Cord, we cannot afford this. Yes, we can. I have been saving for 2 years. He took her hand, slipping the ring onto her finger beside her wedding band. You never had a proper engagement ring. I wanted to give you one. I wanted you to have something that shows the world how much I value you, how much I treasure you. Josephine looked at the ring, tears blurring her vision. It is beautiful. You are beautiful. This life we have built is beautiful. So let us keep building it, Cord said, for another 10 years, and another after that, as long as we both shall live. As long as we both shall live, Josephine echoed, and meant it with every fiber of her being. They rode back to the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the prairie in shades of gold and crimson. Thomas and Margaret came running to meet them, full of stories about their day. Josephine scooped Margaret into her arms while Cord swung Thomas onto his shoulders, and together they walked to the house they had built with their own hands and their shared dreams. That night, after the children were in bed, Josephine and Cord sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. It was a sight they had seen 1,000 times, but it never got old. The vastness of the sky, the peace of the prairie, the solid warmth of each other's presence. "Do you remember what you said to me the day we met?" Josephine asked. "I said a lot of things that day." "You said everyone told you I was difficult, and you thought we would get along fine." Josephine leaned her head on his shoulder. "You were right." Cord laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. "I was I not? Best decision I ever made, walking into that store and asking for a job. Best decision I ever made, saying yes." Josephine turned to look at him, memorizing the lines of his face in the starlight. "I love you, Cord. More than I thought it was possible to love anyone." "I love you too," Cord replied, pulling her close. "My difficult, beautiful, amazing wife. Thank you for taking a chance on me. Thank you for being worth the chance." They sat in comfortable silence, wrapped in each other and the peace they had fought so hard to create. Josephine thought about the woman she had been when she arrived in Deadwood, bitter, closed off, convinced that safety meant isolation. And then she thought about who she was now: a wife, a mother, a partner in every sense of the word. Someone who had learned that true strength meant being brave enough to be vulnerable, that real independence meant choosing to depend on someone trustworthy. That love was not a weakness, but the greatest courage of all. The years continued to unfold with all their expected joys and challenges. Thomas grew into a thoughtful young man who loved working with the horses as much as his father did. Margaret developed a head for numbers that rivaled her mother's, and by the time she was 12, she was helping manage the ranch accounts. Cord's hair went gray at the temples, and Josephine's face gained the lines of a life well lived. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, market fluctuations, and sick livestock. They celebrated birthdays and holidays, grieved when loved ones passed, and welcomed new neighbors who came to tame the wild prairie. Through everything, they remained a team, making decisions together, supporting each other, choosing each other again and again. When Thomas was 17, he met a girl at a dance in Deadwood. Her name was Sarah, and she was the daughter of a school teacher. Josephine watched her son fall in love and remembered her own courtship with bittersweet nostalgia. "It is terrifying, is it not?" she said to Cord one evening, "watching him take this risk." "It is," Cord agreed, "but we have taught him well. He knows what real partnership looks like. He will not settle for less." Thomas and Sarah married the following year, in a ceremony at Hope Ranch surrounded by friends and family. Josephine cried through the entire service, remembering her own wedding and marveling at how much had changed. After the ceremony, Thomas hugged her tightly. "Thank you," he whispered, "for showing me what love looks like, for being an example of what marriage should be." "You are going to be so happy," Josephine told him, meaning it. "Just remember to be patient with each other, and never stop choosing each other even when it is hard." "I will remember," Thomas promised. 2 years later, Margaret announced she wanted to attend a teaching college back east. It was Josephine who encouraged her, despite Cord's reluctance to let their daughter go so far away. "She needs to see the world beyond this prairie," Josephine argued. "She needs to know her own strength, the way I had to learn mine. We cannot protect her from everything, Cord. We can only give her the tools to protect herself." "When did you get so wise?" Cord asked, pulling her close. "About the same time a stubborn cowboy walked into my store and refused to be intimidated by my reputation," Josephine replied with a smile. Margaret left for college that fall, brave and excited and just a little bit scared. Josephine and Cord watched the train pull away, holding hands tightly, facing this new phase of their lives together. The ranch felt too quiet without the children's constant noise and activity, but Josephine and Cord adjusted, rediscovering each other in the peaceful spaces their children had occupied. They took long rides across their land, had leisurely dinners on the porch, made love in the middle of the afternoon just because they could. I am not sure whether I should be sad they are grown or grateful we get time alone together, Josephine mused one evening. Both, Cord replied. We can be both. That is the thing about love, Josephine. It is big enough to hold all the complicated feelings at once. When Thomas and Sarah's first child was born, a boy they named Cord after his grandfather Josephine held her grandson and felt the circle complete. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from a bitter widow in Chicago to a grandmother on a thriving ranch in South Dakota. It had been hard and beautiful, and worth every moment of fear she had pushed through. What are you thinking about, Cord asked, watching her with their grandson. About how far we have come, Josephine replied. About how none of this would have happened if you had not walked into my store that day and seen past my difficult reputation to who I actually was. I saw someone who was scared and protecting herself the only way she knew how, Cord said gently. I saw someone worth the effort of getting to know. I was right. You were right, Josephine agreed, passing him the baby. About so many things. They celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary with a party at the ranch, surrounded by family and friends. Thomas and Sarah were there with little Cord and their new baby daughter. Margaret came home from college with stories of her studies and plans to teach in Deadwood once she graduated. Neighbors from all over the territory came to celebrate the couple who had become pillars of their community. Mary, who still ran the store in town, pulled Josephine aside at one point. Do you remember when you first came to Deadwood? You were so fierce and so alone. Look at you now. Look at everything you have built. I had help, Josephine said, her eyes finding Cord across the crowd. I could not have done any of it without him. That is what partnership is, Mary replied. Not doing everything alone, but finding someone who makes you stronger. You too have that. It is a beautiful thing. That night, after everyone had gone home and the children were asleep in their old rooms, Josephine and Cord lay in bed together, holding hands in the darkness. 20 years, Cord mused. Feels like both forever and no time at all. I know what you mean. Josephine turned to face him, her eyes adjusting to the dark until she could make out his features. Do you have any regrets? Not a single one. Cord's hand came up to cup her face. Every choice I made led me here, to you, to this life. How could I regret any of it? I regret the years I wasted being afraid, Josephine admitted. All that time I could have been happy if I had just been brave enough to be vulnerable. You were doing what you needed to do to survive, Cord replied. You cannot regret that, Josephine. Those years made you who you are. They brought you to Deadwood. They prepared you to build something real. Everything happens when it is supposed to. Josephine considered this, then nodded. You're right. I needed to learn to stand on my own before I could learn to stand with someone else. I needed to find my strength before I could share it. And now? Now I am exactly where I'm supposed to be, Josephine said firmly. With you. Always with you. They made love slowly, tenderly, with the ease and intimacy of two people who knew each other's bodies as well as their own. And afterward, as they drifted toward sleep, Josephine felt the profound contentment of a life lived fully and loved completely. The seasons continued their eternal cycle. Spring brought new foals and the smell of fresh grass. Summer meant long days of work and children's laughter. Fall painted the prairie in gold and crimson. Winter wrapped everything in silent white. And through all of it, Josephine and Cord remained constant, their love the foundation on which everything else was built. When Cord turned 50, Josephine threw him a surprise party. He pretended to be annoyed at the fuss, but secretly loved every minute of it. When Josephine turned 50 a few months later, Cord took her on a trip to Denver, just the two of them, staying in a fancy hotel and eating in nice restaurants and remembering what it felt like to be young and falling in love. Except we are not young anymore, Josephine said, examining her reflection in the hotel mirror. Look at all these gray hairs. I love your gray hairs, Cord said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. They are proof of all the years we have spent together. Every line on your face, every gray hair on your head is a map of our life. You are more beautiful now than you were at 28. You are biased, Josephine accused, but she was smiling. I am honest, Cord corrected. There is a difference. Margaret graduated from college and returned to Deadwood to teach, just as she had planned. She met a young lawyer, and they married in a small ceremony at Hope Ranch. Thomas and Sarah had 3 more children, filling the ranch with noise and chaos whenever they visited. The horses continued to thrive, and Hope Ranch became known as one of the best breeding operations in the territory. And through it all, Josephine and Cord grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They had arguments, of course, disagreements about ranch decisions or child-rearing philosophies or how to spend their limited free time. But they always worked through them, always remembered that they were on the same team, always chose each other over being right. On their 30th anniversary, they took a quiet ride out to the meadow where Cord had given Josephine her engagement ring. The place had become special to them over the years, a spot they returned to for important conversations and peaceful moments. 30 years, Josephine said wonderingly. How did that happen? One day at a time, Cord replied. One choice at a time. One I love you at a time. Do you remember what you said to me, that first day you came into the store? Josephine asked, though she knew he did. They had reminisced about it often over the years. I said everyone told me you were difficult, and I thought we would get along fine. Cord smiled. I was right. We got along better than fine. We got along perfectly. Not perfectly, Josephine corrected, but real, honest, true. That is better than perfect, Cord agreed. He dismounted and helped Josephine down, and they walked hand in hand through the wildflowers. I have been thinking about something. What is that? About legacy, about what we leave behind. Cord stopped and turned to face her. We have built something good here, Josephine. Not just the ranch, though that is important, but a family, a way of living, an example of what partnership can be. That is what I'm most proud of. Not the land or the horses or the success, but the love we created and the family we raised and the life we shared. Tears streamed down Josephine's face. You're going to make me cry. Good tears, I hope. The best tears, Josephine confirmed. She reached up and touched his face. This man who had changed her life so completely. You saved me, Cord. You walked into my store that day and you saw me, really saw me. Not the difficult reputation or the walls I had built, but me, the woman I was underneath all the fear and anger, and you loved me anyway. I loved you because of it, Cord corrected gently. Every part of you, including the difficult parts, especially the difficult parts. They made you strong. They made you real. They made you the woman I fell in love with. They held each other in the meadow, surrounded by wildflowers in the vast prairie sky, and Josephine felt the kind of happiness that comes only from a life lived with honesty and courage and love. They had built something beautiful together, not perfect, but real, and it would endure long after they were gone. The years continued to pass, more quickly now it seemed. Grandchildren grew and had children of their own. The ranch passed to Thomas, who ran it with his father's steady competence and his mother's sharp business sense. Margaret became a beloved teacher, shaping young minds in Deadwood for 3 decades, and Josephine and Cord, their bodies slowing but their hearts still strong, continued to choose each other every single day. When Cord was 68, he had a fall from a horse that left him with a broken leg and a deep fear that he was becoming too old for ranch work. Josephine nursed him through his recovery with patience and love, reminding him that age was just a number and that his value had never been tied only to his physical labor. You are the heart of this family, she told him firmly. Your wisdom, your kindness, your steady presence, that is what matters, not whether you can still break a wild horse. When did you get so wise? Cord asked, echoing his words from decades earlier. About the same time a stubborn cowboy walked into my store and refused to be intimidated by my reputation, Josephine replied with a smile, echoing her response from years before. They laughed together, the sound rich with shared history and deep affection. When Josephine was 70, she looked back on her life with satisfaction and gratitude. She had survived loss and betrayal. She had built a successful business from nothing. She had found love when she thought it impossible. She had raised good children and seen them build their own happy lives. She had created a legacy of strength and courage and partnership. But most of all, she had learned that being difficult was not the same as being wrong, that having standards and boundaries and self-respect was not something to apologize for, that the right person would not be intimidated by her strength, but would admire it, support it, and match it with their own. On a warm summer evening, when the prairie was painted gold by the setting sun and the sound of grandchildren's laughter drifted from the house, Josephine and Cord sat on their porch just as they had done thousands of times before. They held hands, their fingers intertwined with the ease of long practice, and watched the day fade into night. "I have been thinking," Cord said quietly. "About what?" "About how lucky I am. How lucky we are. All those years ago I could have ridden right past Deadwood. I could have gone to any town, asked about any job, but I ended up here, with you. And it changed everything." "I have thought the same thing," Josephine admitted, "about all the things that had to happen exactly right for us to find each other. If my husband had not died, if I had not come to Deadwood, if you had not walked into my store that specific day, if you had been intimidated by my reputation instead of intrigued by it, any one of those things could have been different, and we would have missed each other entirely." "But we did not miss each other," Cord said firmly. "We found each other exactly when we were supposed to, and we built this beautiful life together. That is not luck, Josephine. That is destiny. That is love." Josephine squeezed his hand. "I love you, Cord, more than I ever thought possible. Thank you for being brave enough to walk into my store that day. Thank you for seeing past my walls. Thank you for every day since." "Thank you for letting me in," Cord replied. "Thank you for taking a chance on me. Thank you for choosing love over fear. You are the bravest person I have ever known, Josephine Cordell." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, millions of tiny lights in the vast darkness. The prairie stretched out around them, peaceful and eternal. And Josephine felt the profound contentment of a life lived fully, loved completely, and built on the foundation of two people who had chosen each other despite every reason not to. She thought about the woman she had been when she first arrived in Deadwood, bitter, angry, convinced that independence meant isolation and that safety required walls. And she thought about the woman she had become, still strong, still independent, but open now, vulnerable, loved, happy. It had taken a stubborn cowboy with kind eyes and steady hands to show her the difference, a man who had heard that she was difficult and had not run away but had walked toward her instead, seeing strength where others saw only hardness, potential where others saw only problems. "What are you thinking about?" Cord asked softly. "About what you said to me that first day," Josephine replied. "About how everyone told you I was difficult and you thought we would get along fine. You changed my whole life with those words, Cord. You gave me permission to be exactly who I was while also challenging me to be more, to be open, to be vulnerable, to be loved." "You did the same for me," Cord said. "You showed me that it was possible to love again after loss, that opening my heart was worth the risk. We healed each other, Josephine. We built each other up. That is what real partnership is." "Yes," Josephine agreed. "That is exactly what it is." They continued sitting together as the night deepened. Two people who had found each other against all odds and had built something lasting and true. The prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of summer and the promise of harvest. Inside the house, their family gathered, multiple generations connected by blood and love, and the example of commitment that Josephine and Cord had set. This was legacy. Not just land or horses or material success, but love. Deep, abiding, transformative love. The kind of love that survives hardship and grows stronger with time. The kind of love that heals wounds and builds bridges and creates family. The kind of love that changes everything. As the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, Josephine leaned her head on Cord's shoulder and closed her eyes, feeling more at peace than she had ever thought possible. She had been so certain that happiness required walls and safety required isolation. But Cord had shown her a different way. A harder way in some respects, but infinitely more rewarding. He had shown her that true strength meant being brave enough to be vulnerable, that real independence meant choosing to depend on someone trustworthy. That lasting security came not from walls, but from partnership. And that love, real love, was not a weakness, but the greatest courage of all. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Cord replied, his arm tightening around her, always and forever. And sitting there on their porch, surrounded by the land they had tamed and the family they had built and the love they had nurtured for more than 40 years, Josephine knew with absolute certainty that every difficult moment, every hard choice, every moment of fear she had pushed through had been worth it, because it had led her here, to this man, to this life, to this profound and perfect happiness. The cowboy had been right all those years ago. Everyone had said she was difficult, and he had thought they would get along fine. Not just fine, wonderfully, perfectly, completely. They had gotten along in the way that two people do when they are exactly right for each other, when they challenge and support and love each other through everything life brings. Josephine Carter, who had once been so convinced she would spend her life alone, had instead found a partner in every sense of the word. And together they had built not just a ranch, but a legacy, not just a family, but a testament to what love could accomplish when it was given freely and received gratefully. As she sat there in Cord's arms, watching the stars and listening to her family inside, Josephine felt the kind of joy that comes only from a life lived with courage and honesty and love. She had been difficult. She was still difficult in her own way. But she had found someone who loved her not despite that difficulty, but because of it. Someone who saw her strength and admired it rather than being threatened by it. That was the real miracle. Not that she had changed, though she had, but that she had found someone who loved her enough to help her grow while still honoring who she fundamentally was. Someone who had walked into her store on a dusty afternoon in 1876 and had somehow seen past her walls to the woman she could become if she was just brave enough to let someone in. The prairie wind continued its eternal song, carrying with it the scent of grass and horses and home. And Josephine, holding tight to the hand of the man who had changed her life, felt grateful for every moment, every choice, every difficult step that had brought her to this perfect peace. This was happiness. Real, lasting, hard-won happiness, and it was more beautiful than anything she had ever imagined.